My name is Thalia. I am 34 years old, a lead trauma surgeon at a Level 1 center in Baltimore. And for the last 10 years, I have lived with the quiet understanding that while I can repair a shattered femur or a failing heart, I cannot fix a family that chose to be broken. I have spent a decade being the invisible pillar, the one who pays the bills and absorbs the insults, until a single rainy Tuesday taught me that some debts are not meant to be settled. They are meant to be walked away from. The night before my wedding, my mother hosted a meet and greet at the Potomac Estate, a house I had spent 5 years keeping out of foreclosure. She raised her crystal glass to 30 of Maryland's elite and announced, "Your sister Zinnia's boyfriend is a federal judge. We are finally a family that matters." Then, without looking at me, she gestured toward the sideboard. "Thalia, dear, the guests are thirsty. Be a sweetheart and pour the water." She said it with the same casual authority one might use on a hired server. I was the bride-to-be, but in that room, I was merely the help. But before that glass of wine was raised, and before my fiancé walked through those oak doors in a dark coat that would make my mother's face turn the color of ash, there was the rain. It was 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in the trauma bay, the air thick with the smell of iodine and the metallic tang of blood. The rhythmic tit-tit of the heart monitors was the only heartbeat the room had. I had been on my feet for 14 hours, my hands steady inside a patient's chest cavity, when a nurse held my personal phone to my ear. My hands were gloved and bloody. I couldn't touch it. It was Elena, my nanny. Her voice was jagged, competing with the roar of a Maryland storm. "Thalia, they're here. The police. The city officials. They've done a red seal on the door. They cut the power. They told us we have 5 minutes to leave. Maya is crying. She's in her pajamas. Thalia, we're standing on the sidewalk in the rain. I didn't let my hand slip. I didn't let the scalpel move." "Why, Elena? I paid the property taxes last month." "The tax bill was in your father's name," she sobbed. "He never filed the exemption." "There's a lien, Thalia. They said it's been building for years." My father, Evander, had promised to manage the paperwork if I provided the funds. I had sent him $4,000 every quarter for legacy expenses. Apparently, he had found a more urgent use for my daughter's shelter. I scrubbed out 5 minutes later, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I called my mother, Ilaria. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I spoke with the clinical clarity of a surgeon delivering a prognosis. "Mom, Maya is out on the street. Dad hasn't paid the apartment taxes. There's a big storm brewing and she's only 4 years old. I'm undergoing triple coronary artery bypass surgery. I need you to come pick her up. Just 4 hours until my shift is over." On the other end of the line, I heard the delicate clink of ice against glass. I heard the muffled laughter of my sister Zinnia. My mother's voice was a polite razor blade. "Thalia, dear, don't be so dramatic. We are in the middle of a tasting menu for Zinnia's pre-wedding dinner. Judge Valerius is here and the house must remain serene. I cannot have a wet child and a frantic nanny ruining the floors before the guests arrive. You're a doctor, isn't that right? You make plenty of money. Go hire a car. Go rent a hotel. Don't be a burden on your sister's most important night." "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She's your granddaughter. It's freezing outside." "Priorities, Thalia," she replied. "We are finally entering the circles we belong in. Don't embarrass us with your poor planning." She hung up. 10 seconds later, a notification chimed. Ilaria had sent a photo to the family group chat. A bottle of 1982 Bordeaux, sitting on a white marble counter, captioned, "Counting down the hours until our family finally joins the elite. Cheers to Zinnia." I stood at the stainless steel scrub sink, watching the water swirl down the drain. I realized then that I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased. I was a resource to be tapped, not a daughter to be loved. A wise person once said that when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I had spent 30 years ignoring the evidence. I didn't call my family back. I called Cassian. His voice was a low, steady frequency that cut through the noise of the hospital. He didn't ask how it happened. He didn't offer empty pity. He offered logistics. "I'm 3 minutes away from them, Thalia," Cassian said. "I've already booked the penthouse at the Four Seasons, Baltimore. Maya will be in a warm bath and a silk bed before you finish your next stitch. Focus on the patient. I have the rest." "Cassian, I said, my throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me for doing what family is supposed to do, he replied. I walked back into the operating room. As I stepped over the threshold, I felt the weight of 30 years of doing the right thing fall away. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, quiet peace of a boundary being drawn in the sand. I looked at the nurse. Sandra, block my mother and Zinnia's numbers on my phone. For the next 24 hours, I am only reachable for emergencies involving my daughter. One night in the rain didn't just wash away my patience. It washed away the illusion that I owed them anything more than my silence. The next morning, as I walked out of the hospital, the sun was pushing through the gray Maryland clouds, reflecting off the wet pavement. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a text. It was a call from my private banker. Miss Evander? This is Marcus from the High Net Worth Division. I'm calling regarding your secondary credit card, the one issued to your sister, Zinnia. She's currently at a bridal boutique in Georgetown trying to authorize a $15,000 transaction for a custom lace veil. It has triggered an overdraft alert on your primary savings. Shall we approve the charge? I looked at the hospital entrance, where a stranger, a young resident, was holding the door open for an elderly woman. A small act of kindness that my own mother couldn't muster for her grandchild. I thought about the 1982 Bordeaux. I thought about Maya's soaked teddy bear. No, I said. My voice was calm. Cancel the card, effective immediately. And the boutique, Miss Evander? Let her figure it out, I said. I'm done performing miracles for people who don't believe in me. I hung up and walked toward Cassian's car. I knew the consequences. I knew that in their eyes, I was now the villain. But when I saw my daughter's face pressed against the car window, waving goodbye with a tired but safe smile, I was more than just a doctor. I was free. Now, let me take you back 5 years. It was late May in Bethesda, Maryland. The air was thick with the scent of blooming azaleas and the crushing weight of expectations. In the world I grew up in, love was never a gift. It was a currency. It was a ledger of who brought the most prestige to the table and who required the least amount of maintenance. The house on Hawthorne Street was a masterclass in curated perfection. My mother, Ilaria, was the architect of our social standing, a woman who believed that a family was only as strong as its most visible success. My father, Evander, was a man of quiet, expensive habits who spent his life avoiding conflict by nodding in agreement with whoever spoke the loudest. Then there was Zinnia, my older sister. Zinnia was ethereal, fragile, and eternally high maintenance. She was an artist who lived in a world of vibes and aesthetics, a person so delicate she couldn't be expected to handle the grime of a real career. In the hierarchy of that house, Zinnia was the masterpiece meant for the gallery wall. I was the drywall that held the gallery up. She was celebrated. I was managed. She was a dream. I was merely practical. I remember the afternoon of my medical school graduation. I had finished near the top of my class at Johns Hopkins. I had spent 4 years surviving on 4 hours of sleep and caffeine, driven by the belief that if I became something undeniable, a surgeon, they would finally have to see me. The ceremony was held outdoors. I scanned the crowd of black robes and caps for 45 minutes, my heart sinking with every name called that wasn't mine. By the time I finally walked across the stage to receive my diploma, my parents' seats were empty. I found them in the parking lot later, leaning against my father's BMW. Zinnia was in the back seat, fanning herself. Ilaria didn't hug me. She didn't look at the diploma in my hand. Thalia, dear, we had to leave the seats, she said, adjusting her silk scarf. Zinnia had a fashion emergency with her silk slip dress for the lunch reservation, and the sun was making her migraine act up. You know how sensitive she is. I stood there in my heavy graduation gown, sweat prickling my neck, holding the proof of my years of labor. Ilaria glanced at my scrubs underneath the gown and sighed. Go change, dear. You smell like a hospital ward, and we're going to a very nice French bistro in Potomac. And please don't go around telling people you're a doctor today. It sounds so aggressive. For a woman of your standing, it's better to say you work in health administration. It sounds much more refined. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her that aggressive was just the word people used for a woman who could do things they couldn't. I just nodded, took off my gown, and sat in the front seat, silent as a ghost in my own celebration. The pattern repeated itself a few months later at a high society charity gala in Potomac. I had just started my residency, and I was exhausted, my eyes rimmed with red from a 36-hour shift. Ilaria was in her element, floating through the ballroom in a cloud of Chanel. She introduced Zinnia to a group of influential donors as a visionary boutique owner, despite the fact that Zinnia's shop had been hemorrhaging money since the day it opened. When a family friend turned to me and asked what I was doing, Ilaria waved a hand dismissively before I could speak. "Oh, Thalia? She's a scrub tech. She handles the equipment and keeps the rooms tidy. She's always liked being useful in the background. She doesn't have Zinnia's creative spirit, but we're grateful she's found a way to be self-sufficient." I stood there, a woman who had spent the morning assisting in a delicate neurosurgery, being demoted to a janitor in front of my peers. I felt the heat rise in my chest, a familiar burn of indignity, but I held my glass and smiled. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that my work spoke for itself, even if my mother refused to hear it. I rationalized it as a sacrifice for the family's peace. Zinnia needed the spotlight. I was strong enough to stand in the dark. But the dark grew deeper that winter. One night, Evander called me into his study. The room smelled of old leather and the expensive bourbon he was drinking in the dark. He looked smaller than I remembered. He sat me down and for the first time in my life, he cried. Real wet tears. He told me he had made some unfortunate investments trying to keep Zinnia's boutique afloat. He said the creditors were circling, and he was terrified of what would happen to Ilaria's reputation if the house went into foreclosure. "Thalia," he whispered, sliding a stack of cream-colored documents across the mahogany desk. "I just need you to co-sign this family support agreement. It's just a formality. Since you have the surgical salary now, the bank just needs a stable name on the file. I'll handle the payments, I promise. It's just to protect your mother. You're the only one who can save us." I looked at his trembling hands. I saw a man who had never been strong enough to be a father, and I felt a surge of pity. I believed that by signing those papers, I was finally earning my place at the table. I was being the good daughter. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't know that what he called a formality was an unconditional guarantee for a predatory line of credit that would allow him to bleed my future dry to fund Zinnia's illusions. I didn't know I was signing away my apartment, my credit score, and my peace of mind. "It's okay, Dad," I said, picking up the pen. "I can handle it. Zinnia needs the help more than I do." I signed my name in clear, bold letters. I thought I was buying their love. I thought I was paying for a seat at the table. I didn't know then that favoritism wasn't just an emotional wound. It was a financial trap. And I was the only one in the room who didn't realize I was the prey. I looked at the red notary seal on the page, feeling a strange sense of pride. I was the savior, but as the ink dried, I didn't realize that the black ledger of my life had just begun to run red. The ice didn't shatter all at once. It melted in a way that made me believe the ground was finally becoming solid. It started with a ping on my phone during a rare 15-minute lunch break at the hospital. I was sitting in the cafeteria, staring at a wilted Caesar salad, when a text from my mother appeared. "Saw a dress today that reminded me of you, Thalia. How is little Maya's cough? Come for dinner Sunday. Just us." I know better now. I understand that the temperature swing is a calculated move in the game of emotional harvesting. But at the time, I was starving. Not for food, but for the version of a mother who actually saw me. I thought my medical degree and my lead surgeon title had finally bought me a seat at the table of their affection. Sunday dinner at the Bethesda house felt almost like a movie of a happy family. Ilaria was unusually attentive. She refilled my wine before the glass was even half empty. She asked about my surgical residency with a focused intensity that I mistook for pride. She even remembered Maya's preschool schedule, nodding as I spoke. Because I was so desperate to be seen, I fed her every detail. I told her about my promotion to lead trauma surgeon. I told her that between my salary and investments, I was clearing $480,000 a year. I told her about Cassian, though I kept him small. I described him as a quiet man who worked in a downtown legal office, someone who preferred the background as much as I did. I thought I was protecting him from their scrutiny. As I talked, I saw Ilaria's eyes tracking. She wasn't listening to my life. She was inventorying my assets. She was checking the spine of the family to see how much weight it could carry before it snapped. The shift happened on the porch after dinner. My father, Evander, led me outside under the pretense of showing me the new landscaping. He looked tired. He lit a cigar, a brand I knew cost $40 a stick, and his hands had that slight, rhythmic tremble he only got when he was about to ask for a favor. "Thalia," he said, his voice low and practiced. "Your sister's boutique is hitting a temporary snag, a clerical error with the mortgage this month. If it isn't cleared by Tuesday, the credit line for her spring collection will freeze. It's just this once, sweetheart. Only for 30 days. Could you bridge the gap? We don't want to worry your mother." Just this once. Those are the 3 most expensive words in the English language. I opened my banking app right there on the porch. $4,200. To me, that was the cost of a high-end surgical instrument or a year of Maya's extracurricular activities. To them, it was just the cost of maintaining Zinnia's illusion. I clicked send. My finger hesitated for a microsecond. The first time I felt the tremble myself, but I pushed through. I thought I was being a savior. 30 days turned into 60. The just this once became a recurring calendar alert. This was my ATM training, a slow, methodical process of turning my hard-earned stability into their safety net. It moved up the escalation ladder with a chilling logic. First, it was the mortgage bridge. Then, it was Zinnia's health insurance, because she's an artist, Thalia. She doesn't have a corporate plan like you. Then came the HOA emergency. A $5,000 fine for the Bethesda house because the paint was peeling. And apparently, it would embarrass Zinnia in front of her high society friends. I was pulling 80-hour weeks in the operating room, fueled by vending machine coffee and the adrenaline of saving lives, while Zinnia was posting Instagram stories of manifesting success at luxury spas in Sedona. Trips paid for by my overdraft protection. I became a master of self-rationalization. I told myself it made sense. I was the strong one. I was the doctor. I could handle the 2 a.m. shifts so they wouldn't have to face the reality of their own bankruptcy. I didn't see the Bach lot. I only saw the need. I remember sitting in my office at the hospital at 3 a.m. a few months ago. I had just lost a patient on the table, and the silence of the room was deafening. I opened an Excel file on my laptop titled Family Support. I had started it as a way to stay organized, but it had become a record of my own erasure. I scrolled through the columns. Date, vertical bar amount, vertical bar, reason, vertical bar, recipient. The total at the bottom hit a staggering $142,000 over 18 months. I stared at the number until it blurred. I wasn't a daughter. I was a specialized credit facility. A week later, Ilaria called me. Her voice was warm, almost saccharine. "Thalia, dear, I was just telling Zinnia how you really are the spine of this family. It's so good that you're so practical, so sturdy. You're like a high-quality appliance. We never have to worry about you, unlike poor Zinnia, who is so sensitive to the world. You just keep running, don't you?" The praise was a slap. She didn't call me a woman, or a healer, or even a child. She called me an appliance, something to be used until the motor burned out, then replaced without a second thought. I finally understood the truth. They didn't love me for who I was. They valued me for what I could provide. I looked at the recurring transfer button on my banking screen that night. I didn't turn it off. Not yet. I was still caught in the gravity of my own upbringing, still hoping that the next payment would finally be the one that bought the love I was after. I was the one who gave them the key to my treasure. I shared every detail of my life, thinking it would be a bridge to build a relationship. But in reality, it was just a weapon in the trap they were setting. I didn't know it then, but the season of giving was over. The night of the meeting was approaching, and the price for my silence was finally coming. A punishment awaited, and I wouldn't be the one to pay it. November 14th. 10:42 p.m., Bethesda, Maryland. That was the moment the world I had meticulously built out of duty and silence finally cracked open. I was in the middle of scrubbing out after a grueling 14-hour shift. The smell of surgical soap, bitter and antiseptic, clung to my skin. My phone, sitting on the edge of the stainless steel basin, began to vibrate with a violent persistence. It wasn't a call. It was a rhythmic succession of Ring doorbell alerts, each one punctuated by a frantic text message from Elena, my nanny. I dried my hands and looked at the screen. The mechanism of a life falling apart is often surprisingly cinematic. On the low-resolution video feed, I saw the strobe effect of blue and red police lights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement of my driveway. I saw Maya, my 4-year-old daughter, huddled under a yellow raincoat, clutching a soaked teddy bear. Behind her, 2 city officials were stretching a length of yellow tape across my front door. Aline, my father, Evander, had forgotten to file the property tax exemptions on the condo I had paid for in full. A property I had kept in his name only because he had insisted it was part of his legacy management. The law, however, is indifferent to a surgeon's exhaustion or a grandfather's ego. I had exactly 45 minutes before the city officials locked the perimeter gate, and my daughter would be left with nothing but the clothes on her back. At the same time, I was scheduled to begin a high-stakes surgery prep in less than 24 hours. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was screaming. I walked to the quietest corner of the surgical lounge and called my mother, Ilaria. I didn't ask for a miracle. I didn't ask for money. I asked for 2 hours of shelter for a shivering child. "Mom, Maya's out," I said. My voice was low and hoarse from exhaustion after my shift. "The police have sealed the house because of Dad's tax filings. I'm at the hospital. I just need you to let Elena and Maya stay overnight. I'll find a hotel tomorrow morning." In the background of the call, I didn't hear the wind or the rain. I heard the refined clink of silver being polished. I heard the hushed professional tone of caterers discussing a seating chart. Ilaria didn't even lower her voice. She put me on speakerphone. "Thalia, dear, don't ruin this. We are in the final hour of prep for the meet and greet tomorrow. The Reynolds family is coming. Your sister Zinnia is about to become the wife of a federal judge. This house must be a sanctuary of serenity, not a playground for a frantic child and a wet nanny. Figure it out, Thalia. You're a lead surgeon. Surely you can perform a miracle for your own daughter without bothering us." I stood frozen. "Mom, it's 42 degrees and raining. She has nowhere to go." "Then find her somewhere," she replied, her voice as smooth as the silk gowns she favored. "Priorities, Thalia. This family is on the verge of greatness. We cannot have the unfortunate branch of the family tree causing a scene on Zinnia's big night." A second later, my phone chimed. It was the family group chat. Zinnia had posted a photo of herself in a $15,000 custom silk veil. A veil paid for by the secondary credit card I had funded. Her caption was a single line. "Priorities, sis. Don't be a buzzkill." I didn't realize I was shaking until I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Sandra, my head nurse. She was standing behind me, her eyes fixed on the illuminated screen of my phone. She saw the shrug emoji. She saw the timestamp. She saw the blue police lights in the background of my Ring feed. Sandra didn't offer a platitude. She took her own phone out and snapped a photo of my screen. The group chat, the time, the rejection. "I saw it, Thalia," she whispered. "I'm taking a screenshot of this for your records. This isn't just a family argument. This is evidence. Now go save your child." I took a breath. The official anchor of my life had shifted. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff. I filled out the ER intake log for my departure, noting the time and the emergency. I had the police report number, Bethesda PD #220941, and the eviction code 4B clearly marked on the paperwork. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't beg. I leveraged the only thing my family had never been able to take from me, my own agency. I called a private executive car service. Triple rate, $400 for a 15-minute emergency pickup. I booked a suite at the Four Seasons Baltimore, $1,200 a night. It was worth every penny to buy the safety my mother had denied us. The next 3 days were a blur of hospital shifts and hotel corridors. I saw the aftermath in the way Maya flinched at the sound of thunder. I saw it in the hospital bills and the hotel receipts. I had the Four Seasons confirmation hash 9921X and the time-stamped car logs. I had the digital ledger of their indifference. As I sat in the hotel room on the third morning, watching the sun crawl over the Baltimore harbor, I realized that a door had been slammed shut. Not by me, but by them. I looked at my banking app. I saw the pending charge for Zinnia's veil. I saw the recurring mortgage payment for the house I wasn't allowed to enter. A wise mentor once told me that we don't choose our family, but we do choose our boundaries. Strangers had shown up that night. The car driver had held the umbrella for Maya. The hotel clerk had given her a stuffed lion and a warm hot chocolate. Strangers had taken better care of my daughter than her own grandmother. The meet and greet was in 12 hours. Ilaria expected me to show up as the dutiful servant, the practical daughter who would pour the water and fade into the wallpaper. She was right about me showing up. She was very wrong about the version of me she was going to get. I wasn't going back to that house to apologize. I was going back to audit a debt that could never be repaid. One event had killed the daughter in me. What was left was the surgeon, and I was about to perform the most necessary extraction of my life. The air in the penthouse suite was expensive and perfectly still. It was 4:15 a.m., that hollow hour when the rest of Baltimore was suspended between yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the amber lights of the harbor ripple across the dark water. The room smelled of high thread count cotton and a faint, lingering trace of the lavender spray the hotel used on its pillows. Behind me, Maya was a small, steady lump under the duvet, her breathing the only clock that mattered. A lukewarm cup of hotel coffee sat on the marble nightstand next to me. I could still feel the ghost itch of the hospital tape on my wrist from where I'd ripped off my ID badge, and my hands were steady for the first time in 48 hours. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass. For a decade, I had seen myself through my mother's eyes. As a practical appliance, a sturdy bridge meant to be walked upon. I had spent years trying to suture a wound that didn't want to heal, thinking that if I just gave enough, worked enough, or paid enough, I would finally be worthy of the name I carried. I realized then that I had been negotiating with people who viewed my existence as a transaction. I had a choice: continue to crumble under the weight of their entitlement, or climb out from under it. I could keep paying, or I could finally stop the bleeding. I reached for my phone. It was cold and heavy in my palm. I opened my banking app. Facial recognition scanned my features in the dim light, a quick, mechanical confirmation of who I was. The dashboard flickered to life. I stared at the list of recurring transfers and authorized users. Seeing them laid out in black and white made my stomach turn. They didn't look like family support. They looked like a digital ledger of my own exploitation. I began the work with the same cold, rhythmic precision I used in the operating room. Step 1. I clicked on the pending $15,000 transaction from the bridal boutique in Georgetown. Reason for dispute: unauthorized. Step 2. I navigated to the secondary card ending in -0842, the one Zinnia had used for 3 years to fund a life she hadn't earned. Status: deactivated. Step 3. I scrolled to the monthly $4,200 transfer to my father's escrow account. The money that was supposed to protect my daughter's home, but had instead been diverted to buy my sister's prestige. Status terminated. Step 4. I changed the master password and enabled two-step authentication using a private device my family didn't know existed. Finally, I opened the family group chat. The photo of the 1982 Bordeaux was still there, a mocking reminder of where their loyalty lay. I didn't send a long, emotional message. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply tapped the settings and selected mute indefinitely. There were no lightning flashes, no dramatic, climactic music. Just the soft, mechanical click of the lock screen. It felt exactly like putting on a lead-filled radiation suit after a 10-hour surgery. My shoulders slumped 2 inches. The air in my lungs was entirely mine. I wasn't forgotten. I had finally erased the version of myself they had created. A soft knock sounded at the door. Cassian entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I was. He moved through the room with a stable frequency that didn't demand anything from me. He sat on the edge of the velvet chair, his dark wool coat draped over the sofa, the same coat that had felt like a shield in the rain just hours before. "The sun will be up in 2 hours," he said, handing me a mug. "I'm ready for it," I replied. I took a sip of the tea. It was hot and bitter. "I finally stopped negotiating, Cassian. I'm done." He nodded, then slid a thick, blue manila folder across the table. It was heavy, its edges crisp and professional. "It's time for them to meet the version of you that Baltimore knows, Thalia," he said quietly. "The version the Justice Department knows." I placed my hand on the folder. I knew what was inside. I knew the fallout was going to be catastrophic. Ilaria would notice the missing money long before she noticed my absence. She would call it a crisis, but I knew it was simply a consequence. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. The meet and greet at the Potomac Mansion was scheduled to start in exactly 6 hours. My mother thought I would show up in my clearance rack blazer, ready to pour water and play the role of the disappointing sister. She thought my silence was my consent. I looked out at the harbor one last time as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the water. I had thought the silence would be the hardest part of walking away, but as I held that blue folder, I realized the hard part was over. I didn't need to shout to be heard. Now, the truth just had to speak for itself. The light in the hotel room was clear and pure. It was 8 a.m. Friday, and Baltimore was waking up in the hazy mist of the harbor. I sat at my mahogany desk, watching my daughter Maya color a picture of a mountain range. The hustle and bustle of the hospital had been replaced by the gentle hum of the air conditioner. My surgical hands could finally rest. I had been stable for exactly 36 hours, yet I found myself counting the breakfast plates by habit. I left one chair empty at the small table, a ghost of a gesture for a family that had never truly sat with me. There is a specific kind of pain that sits right between the ribs. It doesn't show up on an X-ray, and you can't suture it closed. It's the phantom weight of a debt I had already paid in full, yet was still being asked to finance. My phone vibrated on the marble surface. It was Aunt Elena. She was the only one who had maintained a neutral distance, watching the family circus from the sidelines. "Thalia." Her voice was hushed, cautious. "I thought I should tell you. Ilaria is already at the Potomac House. She's telling the guests that you've had a breakdown. She's using the word erratic to explain why you aren't there yet. She told Judge Valerius that you're the family's unfortunate case. She said you're coming tonight to help out as a way to apologize for your behavior. Be careful, Thalia. They aren't looking for a daughter tonight. They're looking for a scapegoat." I didn't argue. I didn't feel the need to defend my sanity. I just looked at the blue manila folder Cassian had left on the nightstand. "Thank you, Elena," I said. "I'm not going there to apologize. I'm going for an audit." At 6:15 p.m., I was on the I-95, doing 65 miles per hour toward the Beltway. The Maryland scenery blurred into a streak of autumn oranges and deep reds. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need a podcast. I spent the drive performing a mental scrub-in, the same way I prepare for a complex thoracic surgery. I visualized the room, the people, and the boundaries I would not allow them to cross. 6:42 p.m., I pulled into the long, winding driveway of the Potomac Mansion. The estate was glowing with thousands of fairy lights, looking like a postcard for a life I had funded but was never allowed to live. I sat in the car for exactly 12 minutes. I checked my reflection. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress or silk. I was wearing a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit. I looked like Thalia Vander, the lead surgeon of a trauma center. I walked toward the side entrance as the staff instructions in my mother's last text had commanded. I entered the kitchen, where the air was thick with the smell of roasting lamb and expensive perfume. On the counter, I saw the catering manifest. My eyes scanned the list of names. There it was, handwritten at the bottom under the extra staff section, Thalia, wine water service. They didn't invite a bride, they invited a prop. Ilaria appeared from the dining room, her lace gown whispering against the floor. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my suit with a thin, disappointed curl of her lip. "You're late," she said, her voice a polished blade. "And you're dressed like you're going to a board meeting." "No matter. The head server had an emergency. Likely the same kind of drama you enjoy. Since you're so used to doing the dirty work in that hospital of yours, you can handle the wine service. It's the least you can do after the stress you've put this family through this week. Put this on." She handed me a stiff white linen apron. It felt like a shroud. I took it. I didn't say a word. I tied it over my suit and stepped into the ballroom. I moved through the crowd, pouring $300 bottles of Bordeaux into crystal decanters. I watched Zinnia holding court near the fireplace, draped in silk, laughing at something Judge Valerius said. Valerius looked exactly as I expected. A man who wore his authority like a costume, loud and performative. At 7:30 p.m., Zinnia approached the sideboard. She smelled of lilies and entitlement. She looked at me, then at the floor, and smirked. "Oh, Thalia, you missed a spot," she whispered. She accidentally tipped her glass. A dark, jagged splash of red wine hit the white marble floor, inches from my shoes. The room went quiet as the guests nearest us turned to look. "Clean it up, sis," Zinnia said, her voice loud enough for the circle to hear. "You're the expert at cleaning up our messes, aren't you? Don't make a scene in front of the judge. It's my big night." I stood still for exactly 5 measured seconds. I felt the gaze of the room. I saw my mother watching from across the table, her face frozen in a mask of polite concern for her erratic daughter. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt a strange, cold clarity. A guest, a man I recognized as a prominent member of the Baltimore Hospital Board, stopped mid-sentence. He looked at me, then at the apron, then back at my face. I saw the moment of recognition hit him. He had seen my face on the cover of a medical journal last month. He saw Thalia, the surgeon who had saved his business partner's life, kneeling on a floor to blot wine for a woman who couldn't even balance a checkbook. The guest's eyes widened. He looked at Ilaria, then at Zinnia, and the air in the room suddenly felt very thin. I knelt. I used a white linen cloth to blot the wine with surgical precision. I didn't look up. I didn't say a word. The silence in the room lasted for 5 seconds, just enough time for the board member to process the injustice, and just enough time for the front door to sustain 3 heavy, rhythmic knocks. 3 knocks that didn't sound like a guest. They sounded like a verdict. "The guest is here," my mother announced, her arrogance returning as she smoothed her dress. "Zinnia, dear, stand tall." I stood up, discarded the stained cloth, and remained by the sideboard. My expression was a mask of stone. I looked at the guest from the hospital board, gave him a nearly imperceptible nod, and then turned my attention to the foyer. I knew that coat. I knew that rhythm. And I knew that the silence in this house was about to be broken forever. The hotel room was silent, save for the rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of the laser printer. I sat at the mahogany desk, watching the sheets slide into the tray one by one. The paper was warm to the touch, fresh from the machine, smelling of heated ink and crisp static. I wasn't printing a protest. I was printing an audit. I handled the documents with surgical precision, the same way I would organize a complex medical file before a high-stakes surgery. I opened the heavy 3-ring binder, the rings snapping with a metallic finality. I slid bank statements, property deeds, and high-resolution screenshots of iMessages into clear plastic sleeves. I didn't want the truth to be smudged. I added neon blue dividers, marking each section with clinical labels. Tab 1, Bethesda Mortgage Subsidies. Tab 2, Zinnia's LLC Bailouts. Tab 3, Emergency Communications, November 14th. Cassian stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the Baltimore skyline. He was skimming the final summary sheet I had prepared. He looked at one number, the final tally in the bottom right corner, and his jaw tightened. $362,400, he said, his voice a low, stable frequency that filled the room. "That's what it cost you to be the unfortunate daughter for 5 years. They spent a decade calling you a burden while you were their private bank." He handed the binder back to me. His eyes were steady. "Let the paper do the talking tonight, Thalia. You don't owe them a single scream. You don't even owe them a raised voice." My hands trembled for a fraction of a second as I snapped the binder shut, but my face remained a mask of stone. I wasn't there to win a family argument. I was there to close an account that had been in the red for far too long. As I walked toward the car, my phone pinged. A text from Aunt Elena. Ilaria is already spinning the room, Thalia. She's telling the Reynolds family you've had a medical breakdown. She's used the words erratic and unstable 4 times in the last hour. She's preempting you. Be ready. The Potomac estate was glowing when I arrived. Thousands of fairy lights draped over the ancient oaks like a web of diamonds. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and floor wax, vibrating with the sound of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. It was an environment designed for old money and even older secrets. I walked into the ballroom clutching my binder like a shield. I felt the eyes immediately. The whispers didn't stop, they just changed frequency. People looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, their narratives already written for them by my mother's tongue. To them, I was the broken daughter they were kindly tolerating for the sake of the bride. Ilaria approached me almost instantly, wearing a champagne-colored lace gown that probably cost more than a year of Maya's preschool. She reached for my arm with a fake, saccharine smile. Thalia, dear, you look tired, she whispered, her eyes scanning the room to make sure we had an audience. Are you feeling stable enough for tonight? We told the judge you've been under quite a bit of stress lately. Perhaps you should just stay in the kitchen where it's quiet. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. Good evening, Mrs. Evander, I said. I used the formal surname, revoking the title of Mother without a single insult. I am exactly as stable as the records show. Her smile faltered for a second, but she was a professional. She signaled the waitstaff to stay back and handed me a heavy crystal pitcher of iced water. The judge is thirsty, Thalia, she said, her voice a polished razor. Be a sweetheart and make yourself useful. It'll give you something to do other than look so moody. It's what you're best at, after all. Serving. I took the pitcher. I moved through the crowd in my gray suit, pouring water for people who looked right through me. I was a ghost in a suit, performing the role of a servant in a house I had saved from the auction block. At 7:45 p.m., Ilaria tapped her glass with a silver spoon. The room fell into a tomb-like silence. Friends, she began, her voice projected with the confidence of a woman who owned the world. As we celebrate Zinnia's union with the brilliant Judge Valerius, I want to acknowledge the strength of the Evander legacy. Even when we have to carry those among us who aren't quite as accomplished. Some children are born to lead, and some, she paused, her gaze landing on me as I stood by the sideboard with the pitcher, are born to serve. We should all be grateful for the balance. Zinnia smirked from her seat next to Valerius, sipping champagne. Valerius nodded with a patronizing air of supreme authority. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the waterline in the glasses. At the back of the room, I saw my mentor from the hospital. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, crossed his arms, and looked at Ilaria with a chillingly neutral expression. He was my authority signal. He was the witness. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Cassian walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was in a long, dark wool coat, the collar still damp from the Maryland rain. He brought the cold air of the real world into that perfumed vacuum. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cassian didn't look at the fairy lights. He didn't look at the champagne. He walked straight toward me, his eyes locked on mine. Judge Valerius was mid-laugh when he saw Cassian. I watched the color drain from the judge's face so fast it was as if he had seen a ghost. He dropped his appetizer plate. The porcelain shattered on the marble floor. A sharp, ugly sound that cut through the quartet's music. Tss, Thomas? Valerius stammered, his voice jumping an octave. I mean, Mr. Chairman? Ilaria, oblivious to the terror in her future son-in-law's eyes, saw me moving toward the podium with my binder. She panicked. She thought I was about to make a scene. She lunged for the wireless microphone, her voice shrill and desperate as she cut off the music. Before anyone says anything else, she shouted into the mic, there is something the family needs to clarify about Thalia's mental state. She's been very confused recently about certain financial matters. She might say things that are erratic. Ilaria's hand was shaking. She gripped the microphone as if it were a weapon. She thought she was silencing me. She didn't realize she was just giving me a louder way to tell the truth. The ballroom was a sea of silk and tailored wool, a perfumed vacuum where the only sound was the sharp, desperate pitch of my mother's voice. I stood by the sideboard, the stiff white linen apron tied over my charcoal suit, still holding the crystal water pitcher. I felt the cold condensation on my palm, a stark, tactile reality in a room built on illusions. I didn't interrupt her. I had spent 34 years being the shadow in her curated world. I could afford to wait another 60 seconds. Ilaria gripped the wireless microphone, her knuckles white. She looked at the Reynolds family, her eyes wide with a performative, maternal grief. "I apologize to everyone," she said, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Thalia has always struggled with clarity. Since her breakdown last week, she's been imagining things. We've had to carry the burden of her instability for a long time. It's why she's here tonight, as an act of service to show she's ready to heal." The crowd shifted. I saw the guests nod, their expressions softening into that practiced, high society pity. Zinnia took a slow sip of her champagne, her $15,000 custom veil catching the light of the crystal chandelier. She didn't look at me. She looked at the room, basking in the narrative that she was the golden success, and I was the broken remnant. I felt my pulse, steady and slow, like the rhythm of a heart on a monitor. I looked at the clock on the mantel. 8:15 p.m. Cassian stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his hand. He simply walked into the center of the room, and the gravity of the ballroom shifted toward him. He was still in his dark wool coat, the collar damp from the Baltimore rain. He looked like a man who dealt in the currency of consequence. Judge Valerius, who had been leaning against the fireplace with a patronizing smirk, suddenly went rigid. I watched a single bead of sweat trace a line down his temple. He looked at Cassian, and the color drained from his face until his skin was the shade of unpolished marble. "Save the performance for the hearing, Valerius," Cassian said. His voice was a low, stable frequency that made the champagne glasses on the table hum. "Your badge and your presiding authority are currently under review. In fact, they're already sitting on my desk." Ilaria froze. She looked at Valerius, then at Cassian, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. I set the crystal pitcher down on the marble sideboard with a quiet, deliberate click. I untied the apron, folded it into a perfect square, and dropped it onto the server's chair. I walked to the AV station, the one Ilaria had set up to project a slideshow of Zinnia's artistic journey for the Reynolds family. I plugged my tablet into the interface. "My mother is right about one thing," I said. My voice was level, the same tone I used to deliver a surgical prognosis to a grieving family. There has been a pattern of carrying a burden in this family, but it wasn't them carrying me. The screen behind the podium flickered to life. It wasn't photos of Zinnia. It was a spreadsheet, a clinical, black and white audit of 5 years of financial extraction. The room went from a murmur to a tomb-like silence as the data points appeared in high resolution. Years 1, 5, Bethesda Mortgage. Subsidies, $252,000. Payer, Thalia Evander. Zinnia's Boutique. Bailouts, $110,400. Payer, Thalia Evander. Consultancy fees to Valerius Legal. LLC, $45,000. Source, Zinnia's credit line, funded by Thalia Evander. I scrolled the screen. A screenshot appeared. It was the iMessage from the night of the storm. My mother's words were projected 10 feet high. "Don't bring that messy toddler here. You're a surgeon. Rent a hotel. Priorities, Thalia." I saw the Reynolds family, the actual federal judge and his wife, physically lean back. They didn't just stop talking. They distanced themselves from the table as if they had discovered the food was poisoned. I looked at my mother. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a quiet sense of closure, the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting for a love that was always a transaction. "I didn't come here to be your servant, Ilaria," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "I came to close the accounts, and the accounts are empty." My father, Evander, stepped forward, his face a mottled gray. "Thalia, sweetheart, this is a family matter. We were just trying to protect the legacy. You're young. You don't understand the complexities of..." I understand them perfectly, Father, I interrupted. I pulled the blue manila folder from my bag and laid it on the podium. Which is why you should know that you defaulted on the mortgage for this house 6 months ago. The bank was going to auction this estate on Tuesday. I was the one who bought it through a private trust to keep Maya's legacy intact. I am the owner of this property. I looked at the 2 police officers standing at the glass doors, the ones I had arranged to escort the unauthorized occupants after the audit was complete. As of 8:30 p.m., I continued, the trust has revoked your right of residency. I spent 10 years trying to earn a love that was always for sale. I bought your houses, I paid your debts, and I let you call me a failure so you could feel superior. I am done being the ghost in your machine. The silence that followed was louder than any apology they could ever give. Ilaria reached for the mic again, but her hand was shaking so violently it fell from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull, hollow thud. Zinnia was staring at the screen, her custom veil draped over her shoulders like a shroud for a life she could no longer afford. You have 30 minutes to take your personal belongings, I said. The caterers have already been paid to leave. This house is closed. I didn't wait for a response. I picked up my binder. Cassian placed a hand on the small of my back, a steady, grounding presence. I walked past the sideboard, past the shattered porcelain on the floor, and toward the foyer. I set my wineglass down, perfectly centered on the hall table, and walked out into the cool Maryland air. I didn't look back. I wasn't leaving a family. I was finally, quietly, leaving a crime scene. The Potomac mansion did not collapse that night, but it felt hollowed out long before the last guest reached the perimeter gate. The quartet had packed their instruments in a silence so thick it was heavy. There was no more laughter, no more clinking of crystal. Only the hum of the industrial air conditioning and the rhythmic, distant sound of Zinnia's sobbing in the foyer. Valerius had already been escorted out, his face a ghostly mask of ruined ambition, leaving behind a justice badge that now carried the weight of a lead weight. I stood in the center of the ballroom, no longer the servant, no longer the disappointment. The power in the room hadn't shifted toward me. It had simply drained away from my mother. Guests didn't stop to say goodbye to her. They avoided her gaze, moving toward the exits like shadows escaping a sinking ship. One of my hospital colleagues, a man who had seen me through 100 grueling nights in the OR, paused beside me. He didn't mention the ledger or the house. He simply squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'll see you for the morning rounds, Chief," before walking out. Ilaria sat on the marble stairs, the hem of her champagne silk gown soaking up the dark red wine Zinnia had spilled earlier. She looked at me, her eyes darting toward the blue folder I held. "Thalia, think of the family name," she pleaded, her voice thin and desperate. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can fix the accounts. We can make this right." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix her mess. "The name was never mine to save, Ilaria," I said quietly. "I've paid my dues in full. Today, the ledger is closed." Cassian appeared at my side. He didn't look at the people remaining in the room. He didn't offer a final word to my father, who was staring at the floorboards of a house he no longer owned. Cassian simply opened the heavy oak door and waited for me. I walked past the sideboard, past the discarded linen apron, and out into the crisp Maryland air. I climbed into the passenger seat of Cassian's car. As he shifted gears and we turned onto the main road, I watched the Potomac housing estate fade into the rear-view mirror. The red glow of the taillights illuminated the wet pavement, a faint trail of blood and debt lingering in the darkness. In the back seat, Maya was fast asleep, clutching her teddy bear under her arm. Her breathing was deep and even, the sound of a child finally finding a home not sealed by the mistakes of strangers. My heart no longer felt like a clenched fist. It felt like an open hand. 6 months have passed since that night. My new life in Baltimore is smaller, quieter. My house has fewer rooms and no fairy lights, but the air inside is easier to breathe. There are no emergency calls from Bethesda. No recurring transfers for Zinnia's artistic vision. I sat at my desk this morning, the spring sun hitting my medical journals in long, golden bars. I opened my laptop and found the file, evander_ledger.xlsx. I didn't look at the numbers. I didn't need the evidence anymore. I dragged the file to the trash and emptied it. The sound of the digital crunch was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. I stopped waiting for them to be proud of the surgeon. I started being proud of the woman who survived them. I didn't lose a family, I gained my own life. To anyone listening who is currently carrying a weight that isn't yours, you can put it down. You aren't a bridge, and you aren't an appliance. The people who truly love you won't let you drown, and the people who only want to use you don't deserve to see you swim. The world didn't end when I stopped sacrificing myself. It just finally, quietly, began.